I opened the door, and the first thing she said wasn't a greeting. "My father gave me one night to find a husband," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I let out a short laugh until she added the sentence that froze me solid. "And he told me it had to be you." I had never met a man who called himself her father. I had also never given my name to anyone outside a handful of people I trusted completely, so how did a stranger standing at my door, in the middle of a rainstorm, know exactly who I was? But I should back up. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 40 years old. I am a structural engineer by trade, which means I spend most of my days looking at buildings other people have given up on, and figuring out whether they can still be saved. I live alone in a house my parents left me on a quiet street at the edge of Charleston, South Carolina. The kind of street where the hedges are trimmed low, the porch lights stay on well past midnight, and nobody knocks on your door unless they already know you. I have lived here for 6 years now. The first 3, I shared it with my ex-wife, Rachel. The last 3, I have shared it with nothing but silence. The divorce was not dramatic. There was no screaming, no thrown plates, no affair that blew things apart in a single night. Rachel simply looked at me one morning over coffee and said, "You are too peaceful to love, Ethan." She said it like she was diagnosing a condition, like being calm was a disease she had caught from me, and finally decided to cure by walking out the door. I signed the papers without a fight. She kept the apartment downtown. I kept the house with the creaky porch and the garage, full of half-finished woodwork and the smell of pine shavings that never quite fades from the air, no matter how many times you sweep. And that was that. 3 years of quiet. I wake up early, drink my coffee black standing at the kitchen counter, where the afternoon light cuts through thin curtains, drive to whatever job site needs me, come home, sand something in the garage with the old jazz station playing low on the radio my mother left behind, eat dinner alone standing at the counter, because sitting at a table meant for 2 feels like admitting something I am not ready to admit, and go to bed. I do not date. I do not go out much. I have a handful of friends who check in every few weeks to make sure I am still alive and functioning, and a younger brother down in Savannah who calls on Sundays to confirm I have not turned into a complete hermit. It is not a sad life. I want to be clear about that. It is just a small one. A life I built deliberately after the larger one fell apart, shaped by routine and sawdust, and the particular kind of peace that comes from knowing exactly what tomorrow looks like, because it looks exactly like today. And I was fine with it, genuinely fine, the way you are fine when you stop expecting the phone to ring and start finding comfort in the fact that it does not. But there is one detail I need to tell you before we go any further, because without it, nothing that happened that night makes any sense at all. 3 years ago, right around the time Rachel left, I took on a contract job that was different from anything I had done before. A law firm in downtown Charleston reached out through email, no name attached, no meeting requested, no handshake offered. They said their client owned a historic property on the outskirts of the city and needed a structural engineer to assess the foundation and oversee a complete restoration. The pay was generous. The terms were unusually simple. I would work alone. I would communicate only through the law firm. I would never meet the owner. I thought it was eccentric, maybe a privacy-obsessed millionaire, or some family trust trying to keep renovations quiet and off the public record. But the work was honest, and the house was beautiful. An old colonial with hand-carved banisters and a wrap-around porch that sagged heavily on the east side, and I spent 4 months of my life bringing it back from the edge. I never saw a soul the entire time I was there, not one face in the windows, not one car in the driveway that was not mine. I finished the job, sent my final invoice through the lawyers, received payment within 48 hours and moved on. I never thought about that house again. Not once, until the woman standing on my porch, soaking wet at midnight, mentioned a house her father owned on the outskirts of Charleston, a house he had restored 3 years ago, by a man whose name he kept in a file ever since. I did not invite her in right away. I want you to understand that. I stood in the doorway with my hand still on the frame, rain misting past her shoulders, and I studied her face for any sign that this was some kind of setup. She was younger than me, mid-30s maybe, with dark hair that clung to her neck from the damp air and eyes that held steady, even though her voice had cracked moments before. She wore a cream-colored dress, something light and simple, the kind of thing you would wear to a dinner you were trying to leave early from, and she held a leather handbag close to her chest, beige, with a monogram pressed into the flap that caught the porch light just enough for me to notice. I had seen that monogram before, not on a bag, but somewhere else, somewhere I could not place, and the not knowing sat in my stomach like a stone. "You should come inside," I said, not because I trusted her, but because she was shaking, and whatever this was, it was not a conversation for a doorstep in the rain. She stepped past me without a word, and I caught the faint scent of something floral mixed with rain as she moved into the hallway. I closed the door behind her, the lock clicked, and the house felt different, fuller. Like the silence I had been living in had just been told to make room. I led her to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and set 2 mugs on the counter, one chipped at the rim, the one I always used, and another I had not touched in 3 years. She sat at the table and placed the handbag on her lap, both hands resting on it, fingers curled around the straps like she was holding something precious or something she was afraid to let go of. "My name is Isabel Hart," she said, watching steam rise from the kettle. "My father is Elliot Hart." The name meant nothing to me. I told her so. She nodded, like she expected that. "He owns Hart Meridian Properties, commercial real estate mostly, 32 buildings across the southeast." She paused, and the pause had weight to it. "He is dying." I did not say I was sorry. Not yet. I waited, because something in her tone told me the dying was the setup, not the story. "There is a clause in his estate," she continued, her voice steadier now, almost rehearsed. "If I am not married by the time the trust activates, control of the entire portfolio passes to my uncle, Gerald Hart, my father's younger brother." She looked at me then, directly, and I saw the exhaustion behind the composure, the weight of something she had been carrying far longer than one night. "My father does not trust Gerald. He never has. Gerald has been circling the company for years, buying board members, pressuring lawyers, undermining every decision my father makes, and the only legal mechanism my father has left to keep the estate in my hands is a marriage provision written into the original trust by my grandfather." I leaned against the counter and folded my arms. "And your father sent you here, to me, a man he has never met." "He has met your work," she said quietly. "He kept the file from the restoration project, every inspection report, every note you left for the contractors. He said you were the only person who worked on that house like it mattered to you personally." I felt something shift in my chest, not warmth exactly, but recognition, the sensation of being seen by someone you have never looked at. "That is a long way from choosing a husband," I said. "My father believes character is revealed in things people do when no one is watching," she replied. "You worked alone on that house for 4 months, no supervision, no shortcuts." He said that told him more about you than any interview ever could. I wanted to argue, but she was gripping that handbag again, tighter now, and every time I asked why her father really knew my name, she shifted the bag and changed the subject. "How long does he have?" I asked instead. "Weeks," she said. "Maybe less." The clock on the wall ticked 3 times before either of us spoke again. I watched the steam curl from the mugs between us and thought about the house I had restored 3 years ago, the hand-carved banisters, the porch that sagged east, the silence of working day after day in a place where someone lived but never showed their face. And I realized, sitting across from Isabel Hart at my kitchen table, that I had never once wondered who might have been watching from inside that house while I worked. I had never once looked up at the windows. "I am not saying yes," I told her, "but I am not saying no. Not tonight." She exhaled, slow and careful, like she had been holding that breath since before she knocked. "That is more than I expected," she said, and for the first time, something close to a smile crossed her face. Brief, almost invisible, but real. The next 2 weeks unfolded in a way I did not plan. Isabel came back the following evening, and the evening after that, and the evening after that. She never stayed late. She never pushed. She would arrive around 7, knock twice, and I would open the door like it was the most normal thing in the world, like I had not spent the entire day wondering whether she would come. We talked. She told me about her father's company, about Gerald's pressure through the board, about the lawyers circling the estate. She told me about her work as a restoration architect, which made me pause, because it meant we had spent our careers doing the same thing from different sides of the same wall. She told me she had studied at the College of Charleston, lived in Florence for 2 years learning preservation techniques, and came home when her father got sick. And she told me, in pieces, never all at once, about the house I had restored. "I was there," she said one night, sitting in the same chair at my kitchen table, the handbag on her lap as always. "The whole time you were working on it. I was living in the East Wing." I set my mug down slowly. "You were there. For 4 months. I watched you from the second-floor balcony," she said, not looking at me. "Every morning. You would arrive before 7, park your truck by the magnolia tree, and walk the perimeter before you touched a single tool. You talked to the house. Did you know that? You would press your hand against a beam and say things like, 'All right, let us see what is holding you together.'" My face went warm. I did say things like that. "I thought no one had ever heard. Why did you not come down?" I asked. She was quiet for a long moment. "Because I was afraid that if I met you, I would want you to stay. And you were just there to fix the foundation." That sentence landed somewhere deep, in a place I did not have a name for yet. I noticed things about her as the days passed, small things that accumulated into something larger. The way she always sat in the same chair. The way she stirred her tea exactly 4 times counterclockwise. The way she scanned my bookshelves every time she entered the room. The way she never, not once, set that handbag down anywhere but her own lap. And I noticed the monogram again, the pressed letters on the leather flap, and there was something about the engraving that tugged at a thread in my memory I could not quite pull. There were moments between us that felt like standing at the edge of something. A pause where our eyes would meet and hold one beat too long. A brush of fingers when she handed me her empty mug. The night she laughed at something I said about a crooked doorframe, and the sound filled my kitchen like music I had forgotten existed. But she never said anything about what she felt, and I did not either, because I was still the man Rachel had diagnosed as too peaceful to love, and I was not sure I trusted my own instincts anymore, and because every time I looked at Isabel, I saw 2 things at once: a woman who seemed entirely sincere, and a woman holding something back inside a bag she never let go of. It was a Tuesday evening, 3 weeks after the first knock, when the front door opened without one. I was in the kitchen making dinner, nothing fancy, just pasta and whatever was left in the fridge, when I heard the knob turn and heels click across the hardwood. I knew the sound before I saw the face. Rachel walked into my kitchen like she still lived there, arms crossed, chin lifted, wearing the expression she always wore when she wanted something and had already decided she deserved it. "So," she said, leaning against the doorframe, "I hear you have found yourself a little arrangement." I set the wooden spoon down carefully. "How did you get in?" "You never changed the locks, Ethan. That is very on brand for you." She smiled, the kind of smile that does not reach anywhere near the eyes. "A friend of a friend works at the county clerk's office. Interesting things happen when someone starts pulling marriage license applications tied to the Hart Family Trust. People talk. Money makes them talk louder." I felt my jaw tighten. "What do you want, Rachel?" "I want to make sure you are not being played," she said, walking to the counter and picking up my glass of water like it belonged to her. "Elliot Hart is worth north of $90 million. His daughter shows up at your door in the middle of the night with some fairy tale story about a trust clause and a dying father. And you just, what, believed her, invited her in for tea, and decided this was destiny?" "I did not say I believed anything, but you did not turn her away either." She took a long sip. "That is the problem with you. It has always been the problem with you. You are so desperate to be decent that you cannot see when someone is using your decency against you." The word desperate hit exactly where she aimed it. Rachel always knew precisely where to strike. She had a surgeon's instinct for finding the softest parts of a person. "She is a stranger, Ethan," Rachel continued, setting the glass down and leaning forward. "A wealthy stranger with a very specific legal problem, and she chose you, the quiet guy in the quiet house with no connections and no ambition, because you are easy. You are the path of least resistance. You are the man who will say yes, because saying no feels unkind. And she knows that about you the same way I knew it. She chose me because her father did not choose you." Rachel set the glass down hard enough to make it ring against the granite countertop. The sound hung in the air like the last note of a conversation that should have ended years ago. She did. She chose you a long time ago. She has been watching you, researching you, probably since the day you set foot on that property 3 years ago. You think it is a coincidence that a woman who spent 4 months watching you from a balcony suddenly shows up at your door with a story perfectly designed to make you feel needed and noble and chosen? The room went still. I could hear the pasta water boiling behind me, the low hiss of steam escaping the lid, the tick of the kitchen clock counting seconds neither of us wanted to lose. "That is not what she told me," I said, but the words came out thinner than I wanted them to, and I could feel the doubt settling into the cracks Rachel had just pried open. "Of course not. Because she is smart. She wrapped the whole thing in her father's authority, so you would feel noble instead of suspicious. She gave you a story where you get to be the hero, the humble craftsman selected by a dying patriarch for his quiet character. And you bought it because that is exactly the kind of story you have always wanted to believe about yourself." Rachel stepped closer, close enough that I could smell her perfume, the same sharp, expensive scent she wore during the last year of our marriage, the one carefully designed to linger in a room long after she had already left it. "I am not saying this to hurt you. I am saying this because I know you, and I know how you operate. You will convince yourself this is fate, or duty, or some romantic story about a man whose character shone through an inspection report, and by the time you realize what is really happening, she will have everything she needs, and you will be standing in this kitchen alone again, exactly where I left you." I opened my mouth to tell her to leave, to say she had lost the right to opinions about my life the day she signed the divorce papers, but before I could form the first word, I heard the front door open again, softer this time, followed by footsteps I recognized immediately. Light, deliberate, the cadence of someone who always knocked twice before entering. Except tonight she had not knocked, because Rachel had left the door standing open on purpose. Isabel appeared at the kitchen entrance and stopped. She looked at Rachel. Rachel looked at her, and the air between them could have cracked glass. "Isabel," I started, but Rachel was faster. "So you are the one," Rachel said, tilting her head with a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. "The damsel with the deadline. Tell me something, Isabel. Did you practice the speech before you knocked that first night? Or did you improvise the trembling voice right there on the porch?" Isabel did not move. Her hands were at her sides, still, but I could see the tension in her fingers, the way they curled inward like she was bracing for a blow she had been expecting all along. "I did not come here to perform for anyone," Isabel said, her voice low and even. "No, because it is quite a production. The midnight visit, the dying father, the trust clause. Very cinematic." Rachel turned to me, her eyes bright with satisfaction. "Did she tell you she had been watching you from inside that house for 4 months while you worked? Did she tell you she is the one who asked her father to put your name in that file? Not him, Ethan. Her." I looked at Isabel. Her composure did not crack. It shattered, her lips pressed together, her chin dipped, and her eyes, those steady, careful eyes that had held mine across my kitchen table so many times, filled with something raw and honest and deeply unguarded. She did not deny a single word. She reached for the kitchen chair where her handbag sat and picked it up with both hands, pressing it against her stomach like armor. A corner of a manila envelope peeked out from the top, and she pushed it back in with trembling fingers. "I should go," she whispered. "Isabel, wait." But she was already moving, past Rachel, past me, through the hallway and out the front door, before I could take more than 2 steps. The door did not slam. It clicked shut, soft and final, which was somehow infinitely worse. I stood in the hallway staring at the closed door, and felt the silence of my house rush back in like water filling a space that had almost learned to breathe. Then I looked down at the kitchen chair. The handbag was still there. She had grabbed her coat but left the bag behind. The bag she never once let go of, sitting right there with the corner of that envelope still visible. I did not open it right away. I stood over that chair for what felt like 10 minutes, staring at the beige leather, the monogram, the worn strap she had gripped every single night she sat across from me in my kitchen. Rachel was gone by then, satisfied with the damage she had done, pulling out of the driveway with a casual wave through the window that I did not return. I picked up the bag carefully, like it might break apart in my hands, and drove. I did not know where Isabel lived, but something in my gut told me where she would go. There is a stretch along the Ashley River, south of the old plantation district, where the bank slopes down to a narrow dock nobody uses anymore. I had driven past it 100 times without stopping. When I pulled up and cut the engine, I saw her sitting at the edge of the dock, feet hanging above the dark water, the cream dress damp at the hem, arms wrapped tightly around herself against the night air. I walked down slowly, my shoes crunching on the gravel path, then pressing into soft dirt where the grass gave way to the riverbank, then landing on the hollow wood of the dock planks that groaned under my weight. I sat next to her, not close, but close enough, and placed the handbag between us on the weathered boards. Neither of us spoke for a while. The river moved slow and dark beneath our feet, and somewhere across the water a porch light flickered on and off like a hesitant thought deciding whether it was worth saying aloud. "Rachel told me you asked your father to put my name in that file," I said eventually, not accusing, just placing the words where we could both look at them. She did not turn her head. "She is right," she said. Her voice was scraped clean. No performance, no composure, no careful phrasing. "My father kept your documents because the work was excellent, but he did not single you out. I did." She unzipped the handbag slowly, like opening something she had sealed a long time ago. From inside she pulled a manila envelope, thick with age, edges soft from handling. She placed its contents between us on the dock. A photograph, slightly overexposed, taken from an elevated angle. A man in a gray t-shirt knelt beside a cracked foundation wall, one hand flat against the stone, head tilted like he was listening to something only he could hear. The man was me. Behind the photograph was a letter, handwritten, undated, on cream stationery. I picked it up and read the first line. "I do not know your name yet, but I watched you talk to my father's house today like it was something worth saving." I read the whole thing sitting there on that dock. Not long, maybe 200 words, but every sentence carried the weight of someone who had been paying very close attention. She wrote about the way I checked the joists before trusting them, the way I never rushed, even when the heat made the air shimmer above the roofline, the way I left small handwritten notes for future contractors, tucked into the framing where only someone pulling open a wall would find them. She described a morning when I sat on the porch steps eating a sandwich and a mockingbird landed on the railing beside me, and I did not move until it flew away on its own. "I never sent it," she said beside me, her voice small against the sound of the river. "I wrote it the third week you were working there, and I kept it in this bag every day since." I told myself it was silly, that I was projecting feelings onto a stranger who was just doing his job. She paused, and the pause held more weight than any word she had spoken. "But then you finished the work and drove away, and I realized I had not been projecting at all. I had been paying attention, and I had let you leave without saying a single word." The river lapped softly against the pilings. I could smell the salt marsh and the old wood, and the faint floral trace that followed her everywhere she went. When my father got worse and the lawyers brought up the trust clause, I saw an opening. She continued, "Not to trap you, just to have a reason, a legitimate reason, to stand at your door and say something. Anything." She turned to me, her eyes full but steady. "My father did not choose you, Ethan. I chose you. A long time ago, from a balcony you never once looked up at. I just needed an excuse brave enough to knock." I held the photograph in one hand and the letter in the other, and I felt something I had not felt in 3 years, maybe longer. Not romance, not yet, but the terrifying recognition that someone had seen me, truly seen me, in a moment when I thought I was completely invisible. "You could have just knocked," I said quietly. She almost smiled. "Could I? A strange woman shows up and says, 'I have been watching you from my balcony for 4 months, and I think you might be the most decent person I have ever seen.' You would have called the police, Ethan." I laughed. A real one. The first real laugh in longer than I could remember. "Maybe," I said, "maybe not." She looked at the letter in my hands. "Are you angry?" I thought about it carefully, turning the question over like a stone in a riverbed. "No," I said. "I think I am something else. I just do not have the word for it yet." We sat on that dock until the moon cleared the tree line and turned the water silver, and neither of us moved to leave. 6 months passed. I am not going to tell you that everything changed overnight, because it did not. What happened was slower, quieter, and more deliberate than anything I had known before. The morning after the dock, Isabel sent me one text. "Thank you for not calling the police." I sent back, "The night is still young." And that was our beginning. Not a declaration, not a promise, just two people choosing to keep talking when it would have been easier to stop. She did not move in. She did not push for an answer about the marriage clause. She told her father's lawyers she needed more time, and when they pressed, she told them that time was the one thing she was not willing to sacrifice, not even for $90 million. That single sentence told me more about who she was than the letter on the dock ever could. We started meeting for coffee at a small place on King Street, where the barista knew my order and raised an eyebrow the first time I showed up with company. Then the coffees became walks through the historic district. The walks became dinners at the place on East Bay, where they keep the tables far enough apart that you can talk without performing for strangers. The dinners became long evenings on my porch where we sat in separate chairs, not touching, talking about buildings and foundations, and the structural integrity of things that were built to last. I learned that she hated cilantro with a passion that bordered on philosophical, that she read architecture journals cover to cover, that she once spent 3 weeks in a Tuscan village learning to repair fresco plaster from an 80-year-old craftsman who spoke no English and communicated entirely through gestures and exasperated sighs. She learned that I could not cook anything beyond pasta and scrambled eggs, that I had a weakness for old jazz records I inherited from my mother, that I talked to buildings because I started doing it as a lonely kid and never found a reason to stop. We went to see her father together for the first time on a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks after the night she first knocked on my door. Elliot Hart was thinner than any man should be, propped in a hospital bed in the living room of the house I had restored 3 years earlier. I stood in the doorway and looked at the banisters I had sanded by hand, the floorboards I had leveled, the walls I had reinforced, and felt a strange circular completeness, like a sentence I had started writing years ago was finally reaching its period. "So you are the one who talks to houses," Elliot said, his voice like paper slowly tearing. I looked at Isabel. She was studying the floor. "She told you that?" I said. "She told me everything." He coughed, a shallow rattling sound that made Isabel's hand tighten around mine, and I realized she had taken my hand without either of us noticing when it happened. "I kept your file because the work was excellent, but my daughter kept your name for a different reason entirely, and I suspect you already know what that is." I did. I was only beginning to admit it. Elliot died 11 weeks later, on a Thursday morning when the magnolia tree outside his window was in full bloom. Isabel called me at 14 minutes past 6, and I drove to the house before dawn, and I held her in the hallway beneath the banisters I had carved, and neither of us said a word for a long time. She did not cry the way I expected. She was still, her forehead against my shoulder, breathing slow and measured. The handbag sat on the bench by the door, and for the first time since I had known her, she had not picked it up. Gerald contested the estate within 72 hours. His lawyers filed motions. His board allies made calls. But Isabel was ready. She had her own legal team, her father's original trust documents, and a provision that did not require marriage at all, only proof of a committed relationship verified by the trustee. Elliot had rewritten the clause 6 weeks before he died, quietly, through a different firm, without telling Isabel. When her lawyer read her the amendment, she called me from the parking lot and said, "He knew. He changed it." The legal battle took 4 months. Gerald lost on every front. The estate stayed with Isabel, not because she married anyone, but because her father had seen what was real and made certain the law would see it too. During those months, I kept working. I had a bridge project in North Charleston and a church restoration in Mount Pleasant that kept me busy 6 days a week. But every evening, I drove to the Hart House, where Isabel was overseeing her own restoration of the family home, stripping wallpaper, replacing window frames, and repointing the brick on the chimney her father loved most. We worked side by side many nights, not speaking much, just the sound of tools and plaster, and the creak of a house settling into new bones. One evening, while I was fitting baseboard in the upstairs hallway, I looked up and saw her standing on the second-floor balcony, the same balcony from the photograph, looking out at the spot where I used to park my truck beneath the magnolia tree. She did not know I was watching. She stood with her hands on the railing, and I understood something fully for the first time, that she had been standing in that exact spot 3 years ago, watching a stranger talk to her father's house and deciding quietly that he was worth waiting for. Rachel texted once during that time. 2 lines about hearing I was still involved with the situation. I showed it to Isabel. She read it, handed the phone back and said, "Do you want to respond?" "No," I said, "neither do I." And that was the last time Rachel entered our story. One night, late in the autumn, after we had spent the evening sanding the floorboards Elliot used to walk across every morning of his life, Isabel set her handbag on my kitchen counter. Not on her lap, not pressed against her chest. On the counter, open, the leather worn at the corners, the monogram barely visible anymore. I noticed it the way you notice a door that has been locked for years suddenly standing wide open. I did not say a word about it. I just made 2 cups of tea, set one beside the bag, and sat down across from her at the table. She wrapped her hands around the mug, and the quiet between us felt entirely different than it ever had before. Not empty, not waiting, just full. I still live in the house at the end of the quiet street. The porch light still stays on past midnight, but the silence is different now. It has warmth, the shape of someone else breathing in the next room, the sound of tea being poured before the sun clears the live oaks. Isabel never officially moved in. She just stopped leaving. Her coat appeared on the hook by the door, her architecture journals stacked up on the coffee table. The handbag found a permanent spot on the kitchen counter, open, the letter and the photograph still inside but no longer hidden. I think about that first night often. The rain, the trembling voice, the sentence that froze me at my own door. She did not need one night to find a husband. She had already found him 3 years before, from a balcony he never thought to look up at, watching him press his hand against a cracked wall and whisper to a house that could not answer back. Her father did not choose me. She did, from a distance so quiet I never knew she was there. And that night, she only needed one thing, an excuse brave enough to knock. So let me ask you this. Do you believe that quiet love sometimes needs a loud excuse just to walk through the door? And if someone knocked at midnight with a story that did not quite make sense, but eyes that told you something truer than words ever could, would you let them in? If this story made you believe that the truest kind of love does not announce itself, that it shows up quietly and stays, I would be grateful if you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and left your own story in the comments below, because I think more people have been standing on someone's porch in the rain than they would ever admit.